Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending OneSource's continuing webinar series in which we discuss topics surrounding various aspects of IT and telecommunications. This is the first in a three-part series that we will be doing around mobility management, which is certainly a hot topic right now, certainly in the age of COVID and remote workforce. And so again, welcome everyone. Again, my name's Kirk Waddell. I'm the Executive Vice President of Technology at OneSource, and I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague before I go even any further. So just for those of you in attendance, we allow the participants to somewhat script their own introduction. So just keep that in mind as I read this. But I'm thrilled to introduce my colleague and quite handsome friend, Adam Zipf. Adam joined the staff in 2003 as a wireless enterprise representative, so he has a lot of subject matter expertise in that area. And Adam currently serves in the capacity as manager of our customer success team. So Adam, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirk. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So again, we wanted to focus today on really around strategies for managing our mobile device environments in the age of COVID-19. And what I hope that we can come away with today, Adam, is some real life strategies, or at least some thought process around what are some effective methodologies for me really getting my arms wrapped around my mobility environment, which, for some organizations can be quite a daunting task. And so, for the purposes of today, I think we want to identify a couple of key themes here. So one is identifying and tracking users, for each device in real time. I think, far different from mobility, right? Or far different from wireline. That is, has a limited engagement during contract renewal. Mobility is just a completely different animal, right? And it really requires that real-time data, that month-over-month evaluation. So we'll talk about that component, and really also how that relates to also engagement with HR, right? This is really probably one of the few technical aspects within an IT department's scope of responsibility, right? That deals with an HR component as employees onboard and offboard. And so, in fact, effective interaction between those two organizations, is a must. And I think something that you'll talk to us about in regards to really getting your hands around controlling these environments, just as it relates to employment engagement. The life cycle status of devices, right? Corporately owned devices. Am I eligible for an upgrade? What type of devices am I eligible for? Those types of things. Accounting for what we like to refer to as zombie devices in our environment, right? Which we see, is a consistent problem within enterprises. And again, it relates back to the HR component, right, that we're going to touch on as well. And then managing and monitoring procurement and ordering of the activity of these devices, right? Again, all of this kind of stacks upon each other and really envelops this whole life cycle management mentality, that we've been sharing as it relates to other aspects of managing our IT and technology environment. And so I think we all agree, Adam, and I know you do, that the days of the StarTAC, right, the flip phone, those days are gone, right? And these mobility devices now become critical aspects of our company's, the business's infrastructure, productivity, employee engagement. There's all kinds of things that really wrap themselves into this, into this mobility animal, so to speak, and what it takes to manage. So hopefully, we can touch on some of these. And again, I think before we get started, Adam, it'd be great for our participants to maybe understand a little bit more about your background and really kind of how you've developed kind of your subject matter expertise in the mobility area.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Kirk. And that's definitely a lot of topics to touch today, and hopefully we can get through most of those in our time. Just a little bit about my background. If you look up me now, look at my title, Manager of CS, that doesn't really scream, wireless protocol and inventory. So let's just unpack that a little bit. My journey is a little bit different. I started here about 18 years ago when I was still in college here at East Carolina. Go Pirates. So I started part-time back when we had really a wireless team that was a jack of all trades. Obviously, much different environment at that point in time, but I was fortunate enough to grow with that team as we split into a few different functions. We split off into a billing team, then we split off a procurement team, and then had a dedicated help desk. And through those stops, I've learned a lot about the industry, how it can change, what the users need and what they want. And really, most of my time here at OneSource, probably 14 or 15 years, was specifically within the wireless teams, either growing the teams or kind of leading the strategic piece of it. And then now, it's kind of cool, full circle in my customer success role. We really get to see from the strategic standpoint how our customers are growing and sustaining business, and how tools like wireless inventory management can impact exactly that.
Awesome. So as you can see, guys, Adam has a lot of expertise in this area. So I think there'll be a lot of good information that we can glean from him in this conversation. So, we always start off, kind of at the rudimentary level in these conversations, Adam, but if you don't cover the foundational aspects of it, then, you're kind of doomed to fail in regards to developing a true management plan, or a mobility practice, as we like to say. And so, let's just start at the foundational level, and let's talk about inventory management. And I think inventory management, different from a wireline standpoint, right? Where I have an asset, right? I have a telephone number, I have a circuit ID, I have whatever, right? To correlate that with my organization, right? Then I correlate that with a physical address. Mobility is so different, right? And so, let's talk about, tell us about your expertise as it relates to managing wireless device inventory, and really how that practice has to be completely different from a wireline strategy, in that it's just a lot more granular, and has to be at a more detailed level.
Yeah, I think kind of to your point, to set a foundation for the discussion today, we've got to break the mindset that thinking about a wireless inventory is just thinking about your iPhone or your Android or just your cell phone in your pocket. There's a lot of different factors in play with the wireless and wireline worlds converging, and then the impact of COVID on top of it. We pulled a couple of reports in preparation for today, and about 35% of the inventory that we manage from the wireless standpoint is not your traditional cell phone. So the natural question is, what are those devices? Those are internet devices, they're hotspots, they're smartphones, they're iPads, they're tablets. So we've got to kind of break the mindset that we're just thinking about Kirk and his cell phone is all we need to manage from a wireless equipment and inventory standpoint. One thing we saw over 2020 was most of our tickets in our system correlated to about 5 to 6 touches per wireless line per year. So that means a couple of different things. That means there's a lot of activity happening, which I think we're all aware of, from the billing standpoint, from account alerts, from data usage, from troubleshooting, from the one you mentioned of, when can I get a new phone, get new equipment. Each one of those tasks inherently comes with some risk of that user information changing, but also comes with the need for having that information correct to begin with, to make it a streamlined and efficient process. You know, the one thing that we don't always think about, if you don't have that correct inventory, that's got to impact really across the org. It's going to touch HR, like you mentioned. It's going to impact things like help desk. It's going to impact procurement when it is time to get a phone. It's going to impact the billing component from who do I cost allocate this to. And then ultimately, and one of the bigger ones right now, it's going to impact your security as well. So if you don't really know who's got the inventory, where they're using it, and how they're using it, then you really don't have a stable platform to start any of those other components.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point, and I think again you kind of landed on really the fundamental difference, right? I can attach a wireline asset to a specific telephone number. If I see it in billing, I can reconcile it to an active physical address. I've got a high probability that service is actually there and being used, right? That's probably a little debatable, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll say that
Sure.
that's pretty accurate. But in the mobility world, right, just because I have an active telephone number on my account, right, that I mean, and perhaps it doesn't have any usage for a predefined period of time. Maybe talk a little bit, and then I always love telling stories, but I think there's one thing to to be able to identify, okay, I have these devices that have zero usage. But I think you touched on something real quick, and I'd like to just pull that out. But a lot of these devices are DR devices. These are used in, again, disaster recovery situations or for business continuity purposes. And so again, I think that goes to your point of what you were saying before of why it is so important to be able to attach a specific user or a specific use application to that individual device to have that accurate inventory.
Yeah, I think, one thing we saw, not specific through COVID, but just as, like I mentioned, the two wireline and wireless worlds converging, we can't really talk about wireless without saying, the buzzword of 5G. That's only going to complicate this inventory process further to every point that you just said.
Right.
We've got to have that accurate information, and to the point you said, and this applies to not just DR, but we've got, you mentioned it, I think earlier when we were speaking earlier this morning, cellular backup or a cellular configuration as a part of SD-WAN, more complex configuration. Even things like tablets, iPads, Samsung tablets, Android tablets, by nature, those should not have usage if they're being used quote unquote correctly. I have an iPad, I sit at home with my Wi-Fi on it. You're going to see zero usage on that device if it's enabled to work on a carrier. Same thing with a DR. If your network is working, and you don't have your switch being flipped over to that,
Right.
it's going to show zero.
Right.
The importance of having that correct from the inventory standpoint is, one of the things that we like to encourage is the practice of looking at those zombie and zero usage devices. If you don't have that labeled correctly or know what user has it, where it's being used, if you want to use it like a traditional wireline asset, or what device type it is, then what's going to happen is you have a risk of disconnecting service or cutting that off. And when you really
That's
need
when
it,
you find out. Yeah.
that's when you realize you don't have it, right?
Yeah. Worst case scenario. Yeah.
So to reactivate, reestablish IP addresses and get it back up and running on your network is not something that anyone wants to take a part of. So again, it all drives back to having that foundation accurate and maintained, so you don't run into that issue.
Yeah. So I think we've done a good job of unearthing the importance of why detailed inventory is so important, right? And why it's just a completely different discipline as it relates to maybe other assets in the technology environment. So maybe now, why don't you share some real practical stories of some best practices that we've seen, or just kind of the evolution of what we've seen in regards to businesses and how they're managing these inventories, and what a true end-to-end solution looks like that covers some of those gaps that we've identified.
Yeah, I think, one thing you touched on earlier, you kind of joked about the days of the Start Act, but if I remember, very shortly after I started, we all got a laminated card that we put in our wallet that had Kirk's home phone, Kirk's cell phone, and Kirk's pager, because we were all using pagers at that point. That's not what we're talking about now. We're in a very different landscape than that 100%. And I think we would all agree. A lot of times when we onboard or bring in new clients, we get some form of an Excel spreadsheet that's got, some type of user information, hopefully some cost allocation. To your point, you want this to be an end-to-end, really integrated solution. One of the best places we've seen that, like you mentioned earlier, was in that HR component. That looks different for each customer. So it's hard to say there's a best practice of blank when it comes to that, because each situation and each need is going to be different. Some like to log things like employee IDs to be a unique identifier to a mobile device. Some just use that billing information. So, a code or a GL code or a department code. Being able to capture that during the initial order and having that protocol established on, here's the data that we need before we can proceed with that order, is going to save a lot of time and headaches once that comes down to billing and to every other point when we need to do any kind of maintenance on that line. Again, I want to touch on the 5G aspect. Onboarding 5G devices is going to be very similar to onboarding a new user or someone new into your business. It's going to work more like a traditional wireline asset. But again, we need to make sure we have a protocol and a system established to track that from end to end so that we don't run into any issues when it comes to that. That also, like you said, touches on the billing, but it kind of a different component. So one of the processes that we've seen is really trying to integrate that with carrier data to identify the zero usage, like you mentioned, or the flip side, to identify when usage is, possibly being misused or abused by a user. So, one of the immediate impacts that we all felt from COVID, we all, sat home for a couple of weeks and had to start using our cell phones. Well, that drove a different type of data use for any corporate, cell phone plan. So what that did was, drive the need for inventory so that we could either figure out, is someone intentionally doing this, or how do we write the
Right.
user to make sure they're using that in the correct way.
Yeah. So yeah, I think having visibility to, again, that real-time usage that then can influence behavioral impact, regardless of what it is certainly a key in regards to that. And I think, as you pointed out, and we've seen this become much more sophisticated, right, with integration into HR platforms, such as SAP and or other HR platforms into, whether it be internal or external systems from a ticketing standpoint. If you're not having those conversations, I think we both agree, Adam, if you're not having those conversations in which your technology team or those responsible for managing the cellular environment are not having those conversations with HR, there's definitely something broken in that component. So I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would love to, I think, get more information from you. And you've kind of hit on this a little bit in regards to how this has evolved, right? Where we're now managing, wireless devices, LTE, SIM cards and things of that nature as really, wireline replacement services. And that's going to, I think, continue to evolve, through, as 5G becomes more available, which I wish we could say we were more bullish on. We'll touch on that in a different discussion, but it's coming, right? And it'll get here eventually in regards to complete company adoption. So, but I think, one of the things I'd be interested to hear from you is, and you've touched on it a little bit already, but really around, the wireless inventory landscape and how that has actually changed through COVID, and maybe enhance upon what you just said, in regards to user changes, verifying user changes are accurate and things of that nature.
Yeah, very good point. So one of the things that we saw and we all felt, right, was we got sent home and immediately how we used our technology and the underlying technology changed, right? So we're used to sitting in an office. We all, for our company at least, we had a phone sitting on our desk that we would pick up and talk on and, yell at people on all day. We got sent home, that completely changed. I don't have a desk phone here. It's not really conducive with my setup. And I think most of our teams and the audience felt that. So immediately all of that voice traffic turned to a cell phone just overnight. Um, Most of the traffic like we're doing today either went to a cell phone or to some type of laptop. So what does that mean? That drove a higher, really a higher need, and something we probably were the least prepared for was having to make sure we had the correct internet and reliable and stable internet at home. So depending on the area, you may have a couple of carriers to choose from. Our area, we don't. And just for some of our users, sitting at home all day was not a viable option. So
Right.
the alternative for our company was, we'll send you a hotspot. I can send you a cellular device that'll work just like your internet would. Well, again, to the point that we keep reinforcing, if you don't have the right process in place up front to gather who's using it and how it's being used, you're going to run into issues down the road. The really common example I like to use is 6 months ago, Kirk needed a hotspot. Well, now they fixed his internet in his neighborhood and he doesn't need it. So he wants to send in a request on how to disconnect that. One way to look at that is, hey, Adam, this is Kirk. I need to disconnect my hotspot. With our inventory management system, that's a pretty simple thing. I can find Kirk's asset. I know the phone number. We can contact the right carrier because we've got all that on one platform together and we can move. The other side of that is, our company uses multiple carriers. We've got 3 carriers in play. I don't know who Kirk's hotspot's with. So Kirk, can you provide me some data, some IMEI or some serial numbers off that? Okay, now I have that. Let's reference multiple reports of multiple carriers calling the carriers to see whose device it is. Then you got to figure out the contract information. And then if you can cut it off, what the fees are, relay that back to Kirk, play kind of that telephone game back and forth. The overlying point, if we have all of that information in one consolidated and maintained system, then you avoid the latter and you can just move forward with, I need to make this request, boom, let's take action and we're done with it.
That's really good feedback. So let's kind of move a little further into, let's talk about kind of the procurement science itself, about procuring devices, and how do I keep control mechanisms in place to, number one, keep my procurement device, my costs for device procurement under control. But and I think this goes to one of the things that I think people just quickly bypass when they're thinking about mobility, but it's really around a wireless policy,
Yep.
and really giving thought to, okay, what devices do I need to provide to my employees for them to meet their specific needs, or what I need them to achieve from an organizational standpoint. So let's if you don't mind, Adam, let's talk about kind of foundationally how developing kind of that wireless policy, which incorporates device assignments based off user types, and then how that evolves into just the procurement science and methodology as a whole.
Yeah. So you kind of answered your own question in there with the wireless policy, right? I mean, the policies that we suggest and that we really enjoy seeing from our customers, it's really multifaceted. It's not just to procurement. A lot of them outline what is acceptable use, what is not acceptable. Here's some best practices. But where we see the best traction on that procurement science is exactly what you said. If we can define, kind of the sweet spot that we've seen is about 3 different user types. You have, for a lot of our customers, you have like you and I, Kirk, we're sitting in an office, so I don't need something super rugged. I probably don't need, the best case on it because I'm not really exposed to many things. That can be one user level. You've got one that still needs like the email access, but you probably need something more rugged if they're in and out of vehicles or, in the field, if it's that type of occupation. All the way down to, believe it or not, people are still using what we call dumb phones or flip phones. Some people don't have the need for email on their phone. Some people don't want it. There's many nights and
Right.
afternoons, I think we would all agree that we wish we didn't have email on our phones. But if you can break it out and have a corporate policy established that really dictates which user you fall into based on your job description, back to the point of that HR component, when you have an employee being onboarded, it's kind of built into the workflow. This person is X title, he's automatically approved to be in this user category, and then what we can do from there is define or apply a select few devices for that specific role, right? So if you want a flip phone, you're probably in this category. Here's the 2 you have to choose from this carrier. These are the approved devices per carrier. Here's the associated costs. That more or less controls the cost component side of it because from a budgeting standpoint what you're looking at per user group, within a varying degree on what's going to change. But again, establishing that piece up front can make all the difference in the cost component. But also, one thing I think you touched on was, onboarding employees and getting this technology ready. That's a big part of the employee life cycle too, right? You want to set that bar high. We care about you as an employee. Here's everything on day one that you might need. So again, if you have all of the information written in the policy and you've got a process built around that to gather that information, then you're going to set that bar high and hopefully maintain it through the life cycle of that employee.
Yeah, you kind of hit on something that is kind of the dual impact of having this established kind of wireless policy and this wireless process in place, and that's employee experience, right? Which as competition for employment continues to increase, as hopefully we see the economy bounce back and things of that nature. That's all part of the employee experience, whether we give a lot of weight to it or not, right? And so I think, to your point, having that in a very solid process so that day one when employee joins the organization, they have that cell phone ready, kitted, enabled, ready to do what they need to do. It says a lot about the company's commitment to them as an employee. So I, you know before we open it up for questions, Adam, as we're nearing the end of our time, I would like to get some feedback from you. What are some examples of the things that I should be capturing in my mobile inventory system, or what should I look for if I'm looking to perhaps outsource mobility management, or if I'm looking to utilize a mobility tracking solution? What are the things that I should be conscious of in regards to the important data points?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I think, as a standard, you're going to want the normal device information. You're going to want phone number, somewhere to put user information, um, kind of that added layer with the billing component we talked about. If you can put carrier and account information, that's going to save you a lot of time down the road. Having those customizable, 4, 5, 6 fields, whatever that might be for the GL coding or anything else specific to that employee you want to add. Even down to coding that person through a GL code to a location if you want to get that level of detail. I think having that foundation is really essential in what you're going to want moving forward. The biggest thing too is if you're going through that, the thought process is if you want a full expense management or just someone to help with the inventory system specifically, the biggest thing to think about is, are you looking for just a software component or do you actually need that service behind it? We all know that the difference in what you're going to feel from both sides of that. There's going to be a cost impact to that as well if you're paying for the service side, but being able to have that, zero touch or low touch, just submit the order and then the rest is taken care of, is going to make a big difference and should be heavily weighed in when you're trying to balance the two.
Yep. So hopefully, thanks, Adam. I think that was all very valuable information, and hopefully for our participants, they did as well. I forgot to mention at the beginning of our broadcast that we will be taking Q&A now. So you should see the Q&A tab in the middle of your screen. And if you have any questions around that, around our discussion today, by all means, please post them in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to respond to those. So, Adam, I do have one question here, and it relates around. Do you have any visuals or anything that you could share with us that would perhaps create some structure around what we've talked about in regards to what a really appropriate inventory management tool would look like?
I do. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Not at all.
Real quick. All right, one sec here. All right, confirm when you can see that for me, Kirk.
You're good.
Awesome. So I grabbed a couple of screenshots from our, proprietary portal just to have for reference today. One link just for reference is the name of our internal portal that we provide to our customers. This screenshot you're looking at here essentially outlines what I mentioned. What are you looking for in your basic inventory capture? So you're going to see, through the screenshot, you've got phone numbers, user information, the account information with the carrier, contract information, and then any coding or location information that you might need. These other couple screenshots that I grabbed here are around kind of that integration with the other systems, whether it's the HR or the billing component. So these are just a couple examples of some order forms I pulled. The first one here on the left is just updating that user information. So, we took Kirk's hotspot, reallocated it to Adam. We want to have a way to track that and keep that, updated in real time. So obviously we have a form dedicated to that. And then the form on the right is one of the forms we use for new orders. So that's got, specific to one of our customers in the portal, what information they require to capture to place that order initially, right? So you've got the user information, the GL coding, the employee ID, obviously the basic order, what are we ordering and where is it going to? But again, that has the downstream impact to streamline help desk billing and the billing allocation if we have that captured up front. And the third one here is, again, another order form, so not drastically different than the other two, but just an example of one of the forms on how to cancel user services. And one of the things that we like, and one of the kind of facets that we built the portal around is, we have everything based around searching by a phone number. But to the point we've hit on earlier, if we don't know the phone number, if it's a device that we might not know, all of these forms have the option to search by a user or any user specific data that we have. So if I needed to search for Kirk to see what devices Kirk have, that's something that's, built into this flow automatically. So again, you're not referencing multiple spreadsheets or carriers or portals or try to pull reports. You can do it all through this single management here.
Yeah, and I think the point we're trying to show you here is just the information, right, that you should be capturing, regardless of whether you're supporting this environment internally or outsourcing to a third party. So, I think the importance there is just the information that you want to capture itself. So, Well, Adam, we are at the end of our time today. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us today, and to all our participants. I want to thank you as well. We will be providing an email with a link to the recorded session of this webinar, as well as a link to a survey. And we welcome the feedback as it relates to both the content itself as well as ideas for future webinars, as we certainly want to make sure that this continues to be educational and beneficial for our participants. So again, thank you for everything, and appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and hope you guys have a great remainder of the week. Take care.
Thanks, Kirk.